I used to think Thanksgiving was sacred, one of the rare days when family came together and put aside differences, even if just for the sake of tradition. But I learned the hard way that some families don't gather to be grateful. They gather to remind you exactly how little you mean to them. My name is Lila, and this is the story of the Thanksgiving that burned every illusion I had about love, loyalty, and blood. The night my parents finally said aloud what they had whispered in their actions my whole life, that I was never wanted, and the moment I decided they would regret ever making me feel that small. It started weeks before Thanksgiving. My mom called me late one night, not to ask how I was doing, not to check on my work or my new place, but to say, "Thanksgiving's at our house again this year. Try not to wear anything weird. And please don't bring that vegan nonsense. It's not cute anymore." That was her version of an invitation. I was used to this tone. My sister Amelia could show up wearing glitter-covered boots and screaming about Mercury retrograde, and she'd be greeted with a kiss on the forehead and a fresh cup of cinnamon cider. I once brought homemade cranberry chutney with rosemary and orange zest, and my mom dumped it straight into the trash, whispering to my aunt, "She always tries too hard. It's embarrassing." I had gotten used to it. The sideways comments, the forced smiles, the stories they told over and over again at the dinner table where I was barely mentioned. Amelia was the miracle baby after 2 miscarriages. I was born 3 years later. A surprise, as my dad often joked. Surprise, accident, afterthought. It had become part of my identity. Still, I went. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was foolishness. But I baked for hours, pies from scratch, roasted vegetables, even made my own stuffing with caramelized onions and sourdough bread. I wanted to contribute. I wanted, stupidly, to be seen, to be appreciated, to be anything other than invisible. When I arrived, Amelia was already there, draped in a shawl that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her fiancé, Carter, was shaking hands with everyone like a politician. My mom squealed when she saw them, pulling Amelia into a tight hug. "There's my beautiful girl," she shouted loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I walked in behind them, balancing 2 casserole dishes and a covered pie. My mom glanced at me, then turned back to Amelia without so much as a hello. My dad gave me a nod, not even a full smile. Just a nod. It hit me harder than I expected. I went to the kitchen and quietly set down the food I'd spent all day preparing. My mom had already made her famous turkey and store-bought sides. My dishes were pushed to the far corner of the table. Dinner was loud, laughter, stories, everyone going around saying what they were thankful for. When it got to my dad, he raised his glass and said, "I'm thankful for Amelia, for the joy she brings into this home, and for Carter, who's quickly becoming the son we never had." Everyone clapped. Then he looked right at me, and said, "And for Lila, well, I guess we're thankful she didn't cancel last minute like she usually does." A few people laughed. I froze. Then my mom, who hadn't touched a single dish I made, sighed and said, "Well, not everyone was meant to be the star of the family. Some people are just background characters, and that's okay. Not every child is a blessing. Some are just unexpected extras." The room fell into a strange silence, half gasps and smirks. I don't remember if I blinked. I don't remember if I breathed. I only remember how cold my body felt. My hands went numb, my stomach clenched. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but I didn't. I looked around the table at faces that didn't flinch. Amelia kept smiling. Carter was cutting his turkey. My uncle snorted into his wine. No one defended me. Not one person. That was the moment I stopped hoping. That was the moment something inside me shifted. My mother had always criticized. My father had always joked. But tonight, they called me unwanted, in front of everyone, out loud, and no one batted an eye. I excused myself quietly. I told them I'd help clean up later. I went into the kitchen, and I stood there, staring at the untouched food I had made. And that's when the idea started forming. Slowly, darkly, deliciously. They wanted a show. They were going to get one. I didn't go back to the table. I stayed in the kitchen with my rage simmering just beneath the surface, hotter than the turkey in the oven, colder than the stares I'd been met with all night. I stared at my carefully baked food, untouched and insulted. I ran my hand over the crust of my pie, the one I had poured my heart into, and realized something so sharp it almost made me laugh. I had cooked for people who didn't even think I deserved a place at their table. I heard them laughing in the dining room. Amelia's voice, fake and bright. My dad talking about Carter like he was the second coming of Christ. My mom bragging to my aunt about how Amelia might be pregnant soon. "We're praying it's a girl, a perfect little angel like her mother." I stood over the sink shaking. Then I turned slowly, opened the cabinet under the sink, and looked at the bag I usually kept hidden from sight. Dog food. Not just any dog food, high protein, gourmet style, shaped like beef chunks and gravy. Meant for Mom's ridiculous Pomeranian, Sparkles, who had a custom-made velvet bed and more sweaters than I did. I took the bag out, held it in my hands, and then something in me snapped into clarity. They didn't see me as human, not as family. They saw me as something beneath them. Disposable? Background? If that was how they wanted to treat me, then fine. I'd show them exactly what being treated like a dog looked like. I placed the bag beside the sink. Then I quietly took a deep breath, rolled up my sleeves, and got to work. My mind went ice cold and surgical. I found Mom's fancy gravy boat and emptied it. I poured canned beef broth in with warm water, whisked it slowly, then added the chunks of dog food, carefully softened and mixed so it would blend into what looked like meat stuffing. I shaped it like a gourmet casserole, garnished it with rosemary, even added a dusting of Parmesan for visual flair. The stuffing was always my mom's prized dish, the one she refused to let anyone else touch. But tonight, she was too busy gushing about Amelia's imaginary pregnancy to notice what I swapped. I worked fast, efficiently, without an ounce of guilt. Every insult they'd hurled over the years replayed in my head like a cruel slideshow. When they said my nose was too big, when my mom made me sit at the kids' table at 27, because there wasn't room, when Amelia took credit for my design work and my mom told me, "Don't be dramatic, sweetie, it's just business." When my dad said, "You're just not warm like your sister. She has charm, you have spreadsheets." I plated the dish, set it on a silver tray, took a moment to admire it. Then I walked out of the kitchen, calm and smiling. "Dinner's not over," I said sweetly. I brought something special. Graduation day was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life. 4 years of sleepless nights, side jobs, buried panic attacks, and endless sacrifice had all led to this. I walked across that stage with a degree in business analytics, clutched in my shaking hands, and a GPA that should have earned at least one tear of joy from my family. But my dad didn't even clap. He sat stiff in his chair, arms crossed, lips tight. Beside him, my mother adjusted her necklace and whispered something about how this whole thing was overhyped. And my brother? He didn't even show up. He was too busy prepping for his big promotion at the tech company Dad got him into right after high school. No degree, no effort, just nepotism and charm. At dinner that night, I tried to keep my expectations low. I wasn't looking for a banner or a cake, just a "we're proud of you." Instead, over lukewarm pasta and forced smiles, my dad raised his glass and said, "To Ethan, he just got promoted to senior product manager. That's real success." Then, with a smirk, he added, "No offense, honey, but degrees don't mean much in the real world. It's results that count." The entire table laughed. I felt like I had been slapped in the chest. My fork clinked against the plate, untouched. That night, I packed my things. I didn't make a dramatic scene. I didn't yell or cry. I just quietly folded the graduation robe they never complimented, zipped up my worn suitcase, and left a note that read, "Thanks for dinner." I moved into a shared apartment with peeling wallpaper and the scent of someone else's regrets soaked into the carpet. I took freelance gigs analyzing small business trends, building dashboards, writing market reports, anything to keep the lights on. While Ethan posted selfies in boardrooms and Dad shared articles about how to succeed without college, I buried myself in data, strategy, and building something no one could ignore. I worked in silence for 2 years. And then I got my first big contract. It wasn't just any company. It was an emerging tech startup that needed someone to overhaul their analytics system. The CEO took a chance on me, and I didn't waste it. I streamlined their process, tripled their growth within 6 months, and stayed humble while they passed around bonuses. But that was just the beginning. One day, the CEO leaned across the table and said, "I'm starting a new firm. I want you to be my partner." That's when everything shifted. Suddenly, the girl with just a degree was in boardrooms, shaking hands with executives my father worshipped from afar. Suddenly, I wasn't just building reports. I was building empires, quietly, methodically. And one name caught my eye on the applicant list for a middle manager role at our new company. Ethan, I hadn't spoken to him in 3 years, but there was his resume, filled with buzzwords and job hopping. Apparently, things hadn't worked out at his previous job. Something about poor performance. I didn't reject him. I forwarded his resume to our head of people and said, "Let's schedule an interview. I want to be in the room." The interview was scheduled for Monday. I didn't tell them who I was, not yet. I wanted to see his face. I wanted to see if he'd recognize me without the family filter. The girl he once called the backup child was now the decision maker. When he walked into the sleek class office, wearing an ill-fitting suit and a too confident grin, he scanned the room and then stopped. His eyes met mine, and for a second, confusion clouded his expression. Then realization hit. He stammered, You're on the board?" I smiled politely. "I co-own the firm." Silence. He shifted in his chair, visibly sweating now. I didn't humiliate him. I didn't need to. I asked standard questions. I listened to him try to spin his failures into team learning moments. But behind my calm demeanor, every word he fumbled was a quiet victory. Every pause was a piece of dignity returned to me. Dignity they had stolen year after year. When the interview ended, I shook his hand and said, "We'll be in touch." He left pale. That night, I got a text from my dad. "Ethan says you're in charge now. That true?" I replied, "I'm not just in charge. I signed his rejection." He called me. I let it ring. The next day, I had a floral arrangement sent to my parents' house. Sunflowers, my favorite, the ones they never remembered on birthdays. Tucked in between the petals was a card. "From your daughter with the useless degree." I heard through a mutual friend that Dad sat in stunned silence for an hour after reading it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forgotten child. I felt like the storm they never saw coming. I didn't plan on revenge when I started building my business. I just wanted to prove I was more than the family's silent disappointment. More than the girl who got straight A's only to hear, "That's nice, but your brother made the varsity team." I worked in coffee shops, slept on air mattresses, spent nights crying into my laptop, trying to learn financial law while my brother bought his second car. Funded, of course, by the same man who told me I wasn't executive material. But success has a way of sharpening memory. Every time I got overlooked, I built. Every time I got mocked, I planned. And every time my father said my degree was just a paper trophy, I reminded myself that the paper he worshipped came in contracts, and I now wrote them. The company I co-founded with a college friend wasn't loud, We weren't flashy, but we were smart. We bought up struggling competitors, trained quiet talent, and expanded methodically. While my family celebrated my brother's quarterly sales bonuses, I was negotiating buyouts and learning how the old boys club protected each other. My father never noticed. He never asked. Until one day, I bought a firm where my brother's best friend was a mid-tier executive. Suddenly, whispers reached home. "Isn't that your daughter's name on the deal?" my uncle asked during a family dinner. My mother dismissed it. "Probably a typo." It wasn't. At Thanksgiving, they toasted my brother's recent promotion, something about regional expansion lead. Everyone clapped. My father raised his glass and said, "Proud of you, son, real leadership, not like that academic stuff." He didn't even look at me. I was sitting right there. So I smiled and said nothing, because a week later, I closed on the acquisition of a boutique firm where his own boss had just jumped ship. And guess who signed his new employment contract? Me. The man who used to treat my father like a king now called me ma'am in meetings. My dad didn't know yet. He still thought his world was intact. But storms don't announce themselves with lightning. They come quietly, in shifts of wind, in pressure you can't see but feel, in your bones. And I was about to make landfall. I didn't plan on revenge when I started building my business. I just wanted to prove I was more than the family's silent disappointment, more than the girl who got straight A's only to hear, "That's nice, but your brother made the varsity team." I worked in coffee shops, slept on air mattresses, spent nights crying into my laptop, trying to learn financial law while my brother bought his second car, funded, of course, by the same man who told me I wasn't executive material. But success has a way of sharpening memory. Every time I got overlooked, I built. Every time I got mocked, I planned. And every time my father said my degree was just a paper trophy, I reminded myself that the paper he worshipped came in contracts. And I now wrote them. The company I co-founded with a college friend wasn't loud. We weren't flashy, but we were smart. We bought up struggling competitors, trained quiet talent, and expanded methodically. While my family celebrated my brother's quarterly sales bonuses, I was negotiating buyouts and learning how the old boys club protected each other. My father never noticed. He never asked. Until one day, I bought a firm where my brother's best friend was a mid-tier executive. Suddenly, whispers reached home. "Isn't that your daughter's name on the deal?" my uncle asked during a family dinner. My mother dismissed it. Probably a typo. It wasn't. At Thanksgiving, they toasted my brother's recent promotion, something about regional expansion lead. Everyone clapped. My father raised his glass and said, "Proud of you, son, real leadership, not like that academic stuff." He didn't even look at me. I was sitting right there. So I smiled and said nothing, because a week later, I closed on the acquisition of a boutique firm where his own boss had just jumped ship. And guess who signed his new employment contract? Me. The man who used to treat my father like a king now called me ma'am in meetings. My dad didn't know yet. He still thought his world was intact. But storms don't announce themselves with lightning. They come quietly, in shifts of wind, in pressure you can't see but feel, in your bones. And I was about to make landfall. What they didn't know was that my business wasn't just profitable. It was influential. We were building tech for financial audits, and our software had started being quietly adopted in corporate governance. I had access now. Access to files, names, records. My brother's firm. Let's just say it wasn't as clean as they pretended to be. Neither was my father's retirement fund. One evening, my father joked over dinner, "You better marry someone rich, since you spent all that time in school." I just smiled again, imagining the boardroom where his fate would be discussed in the next quarter. I already knew what they'd decide, because I would be in the room, and he wouldn't. He told me my degree meant nothing, but soon it would be the reason he lost everything he thought mattered, plated elegantly on matte black ceramic, my own design. The chef was confused. You're serving bone-shaped pastries? I smiled. Yes, I'm serving a reminder. The day arrived. Amelia's wedding was in the ballroom. My dinner was in the garden courtyard. You could hear her string quartet softly from where we sat beneath the twinkling fairy lights and flower arches I had personally helped design. At one point, during golden hour, I excused myself to take a walk near the venue entrance, just in time to catch my mother storming out the front doors in a huff, followed by Amelia, flustered and red. They didn't see me at first, but when they did, when my mother's eyes locked on mine across the path, it was like she'd seen a ghost. I was standing with two editors from a design magazine, both sipping wine, both laughing at something I just said. My mother stopped mid-stride. Her mouth fell open, and I could read the thought forming behind her eyes. How is she here? Why is she being seen? Why is she glowing while my daughter's day is falling apart? I lifted my glass toward her, just slightly. A quiet toast. Not to family, not to forgiveness, to freedom. And then I walked back into my dinner, where people saw me, where people celebrated me, where I was no one's unwanted anything. The chaos didn't end with that night. It only bloomed louder in the days that followed. Photos from my garden dinner started making rounds online. One of the influencers posted a reel with the caption, "Dined under the stars at a private design showcase by @Lila Made. Unreal atmosphere, unforgettable details." The clip showed soft candlelight, custom linens with stitched poetry, and yes, those bone-shaped desserts being served like delicate works of art. The comments were full of admiration. Shares climbed into the tens of thousands. Meanwhile, Amelia's wedding posts were locked. Private. Rumor had it the floral arch collapsed during the vows. The cake was delivered an hour late. The sound system glitched during their first dance, and someone's uncle was caught yelling at a waiter. But the moment that pushed everything over the edge was what happened at the reception dinner. I didn't witness it, but the story got back to me in detail from the Wisteria House staff, who could barely stop laughing. Apparently, someone had printed out my viral dessert photo, the one with the gold-dusted biscuit, and brought it to the reception, whispering, "Is this the same caterer?" The guests started murmuring, asking questions. A few even assumed Amelia's wedding was my event, and they'd somehow missed the invite. My mother was furious. She tried to quiet everyone, but the whispers only grew. Isn't that her sister? Wasn't Leela disowned? She's the one with that brand, right? The designer? At some point, a guest jokingly barked while holding a canapé. The whole table laughed. My mother didn't. 3 days later, I got another email. This one from Amelia. The subject line was empty. The message read, "Was that all to humiliate me on my wedding day? You've made your point, Lila. Stop dragging us through the dirt." I read it once, twice, then let it sit in my inbox like a relic. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because by then, I wasn't dragging anyone. They were drowning in the hole they dug themselves. Meanwhile, I was booked to speak at a design panel in New York. One of my collections had been picked up by a boutique hotel chain in Vermont, and I had just signed a deal for a holiday pop-up collaboration with a luxury candle brand. But the moment that truly sealed everything for me, emotionally, spiritually, came one quiet afternoon when I stopped by the local boutique where I'd first sold my handmade napkin rings. The owner, Heather, pulled me aside and said, "You know, your parents came in here last week, pretended they didn't know who you were. Your mom said, 'We're just browsing.' But she kept touching the display with your name on it." I smiled. Of course she did. Because in the end, they could try to erase me all they wanted, but the world already knew my name now, and they couldn't stop whispering it. The first cold snap of winter arrived early that year, the kind that turns your breath visible and makes everything feel quieter, like the world's holding its breath. I had just come home from a meeting with a publisher. Yes, publisher, interested in a coffee table book featuring my journey, my designs, and the hidden story behind it all. They'd called it inspiring. I called it survival. But I hadn't said yes yet. Something in me was still waiting. For what I didn't know. Until that night. I was sipping tea, curled up by the window, when a message popped up from someone I never expected. Carter, my sister's husband. Lila, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk, privately. It's about your family. I stared at it for a full minute. My first instinct was to block him. The second was curiosity. Because despite everything, Carter had always been different, not kind, not good, just aware. The kind of man who paid attention when others didn't. Who watched silently while damage was done, but didn't always join in. Still, I was cautious. What do you want? I replied. He messaged back almost immediately. I know about the inheritance, about the trust. Your parents set something up years ago. Amelia convinced them to keep you out. But now, they're turning on each other. And I thought you deserved to know before it's too late. My hands froze around the mug. My heart didn't speed up. It slowed, like my body was steadying itself for a punch I somehow already suspected was coming. The trust, the family money. I had forgotten it even existed. I'd long since told myself I didn't care, but there it was. Yet another wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding. I met Carter at a diner on the outskirts of town the next morning. He looked tired, worn, older than I remembered. You were always the smart one, he said when I sat down. They just didn't like that you didn't grovel for attention. I didn't reply. He handed me a file. Inside, proof, documents, signatures, statements. My name excluded from a fund my grandfather had originally set aside for both granddaughters' futures. Amelia's name appeared 3 times. Mine, nowhere. She convinced them you'd never amount to anything. Carter said quietly. Said it'd be a waste. And your mom? She believed her. Your dad just nodded along. I stared at the pages. Not because I was shocked, but because I realized something far worse. I had expected this. Carter leaned forward. They're fighting over it now. Amelia wants it all released early to cover her and Mom's new business idea. Your dad disagrees. They're threatening to sue each other. It's getting ugly. And I thought, maybe you'd want to hit back. With this. I looked at him. Really looked. Why are you telling me this now? He hesitated. Then softly, because I'm leaving her. And I've always known you were worth more than they ever gave you credit for. He left. I stayed with the folder. The storm inside me had gone quiet now. Cold. Clear. They had tried to write me out of my own story, of my own family. But this time, I wasn't going to walk away. I spent the next 2 weeks assembling everything. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even tell anyone what I was doing. Not even the assistant I trusted like a sister. I simply filed the documents, wrote the letters, and made the calls, quietly, methodically, with the same precision they used to erase me. My first step was sending a legal inquiry to the firm that managed the family trust. Nothing aggressive, just a request for transparency. I cited my grandfather's original wishes, attached the paperwork Carter had given me, and asked a simple question. Could you please clarify why my name is no longer included in the trust that was established for both granddaughters? The response was instant. Polite panic in legalese. Suddenly, they were offering to review the situation. Suddenly, I had meetings scheduled. My presence was no longer optional. It was required. When I walked into that firm's office, wearing a tailored navy blazer and heels I bought with my own money, I didn't just look like someone who belonged there. I looked like someone they were afraid of. And I wasn't done yet, because I knew my parents would catch wind of it soon, and I wanted them to feel every inch of the dread they had tried to bury me under. So I made my next move public. I published a short essay on a design blog titled How to Rebuild What They Tried to Erase. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I told the story of being excluded, of serving dog food, of walking away and building a home from my own hands. The post went viral within days. Comments poured in from women, daughters, sisters. People who had felt the same betrayal, the same exclusion, the same fire in their belly that turned into something beautiful. People called me brave, called me seen. My parents called my lawyer. They weren't happy, but they were silent. And silence from people who used to scream at me for breathing too loud? That was power. Then came the letter from the trust firm. They had reviewed the documentation, reevaluated the statements, and determined that a clerical error had excluded me unfairly from the trust's distribution. The matter would be corrected immediately. They didn't even try to fight it. They couldn't, because I wasn't the unwanted one anymore. I was the one holding the pen. And I wasn't just going to take what was mine. I was going to invest it in every dream they told me was too big, too strange, too unladylike. I opened a design studio. I hired women like me, overlooked, underestimated. I made a point to never host another Thanksgiving dinner again. And when the next family holiday rolled around, I was out of the country, on a rooftop in Lisbon, toasting to the silence that followed every lie they used to tell about me. The letter arrived a few weeks before Christmas. It wasn't emailed, it wasn't a call. It came in a cream-colored envelope with gold-embossed cursive, my mother's handwriting as pristine and calculated as ever. No return address, no stamp. Hand-delivered, most likely through one of her old society friends, who still hadn't decided which daughter they were supposed to pretend to like this month. Inside was a single sheet of monogram paper. No apology, no warmth, just, Lila, the family is falling apart. You've made your point. Now it's time to come home. We're planning a gathering for New Year's Eve, a proper one. You should attend. Amelia is pregnant. You're going to be an aunt. This childish feud has run its course. Let's be civilized. Let's move forward. Mother, I read it once, then again, and felt nothing. No rage, no longing, just a strange, hollow recognition, like glancing at an old scar and barely remembering how it hurt. She wanted a truce, but not accountability. She wanted my presence without my story. She wanted to skip over the mess because cleaning it up would require something she had never once offered: remorse. I didn't reply, but I did attend. Not because I owed them anything, but because I was ready to end it on my terms. New Year's Eve arrived, and with it came the polished perfection of my childhood nightmares. White linens, champagne fountains, background piano music, and a guest list full of people who'd always asked me, "Oh, which one are you again?" When I walked in, heads turned. I wasn't wearing anything flashy. Just a black velvet suit and quiet confidence that clung to me like perfume. My mother looked stunned. My father looked aged. Amelia? She looked nervous. I greeted no one. I simply walked up to the gift table, placed a single wrapped box on top, then turned to leave. My mother caught me by the sleeve. "Lila," she whispered, "don't make a scene. You're not the center of everything." I leaned in, smiled, and whispered back, "That's exactly what you're afraid of?" I left without waiting for midnight. The next morning, I got a call from a former neighbor who'd attended. She was laughing. Apparently, when Amelia opened the box after I left, it contained a single ceramic dog bowl. Handcrafted, engraved, elegant. My brand etched beneath. Inside, a card. For when you feed others what you think they deserve, just remember, sometimes it's served back to you. They say the room went quiet, that Amelia stormed off, that my mother turned pale. But I wasn't there to see it, because I was already flying over the Atlantic, headed for a workshop retreat in Florence, funded entirely by the trust they tried to steal, the brand they tried to laugh at, and the woman they tried to bury. Florence was colder than I expected, but I didn't mind. The stone buildings, the aged air, the soft yellow lights that curled around street corners. It all made me feel like I had stepped into a story I got to write at last, without red ink corrections from anyone else. The design retreat was held in an old villa turned creative haven. I wasn't there to teach or to lead. I came as a participant, to learn, to grow, to be surrounded by others who spoke through color, shape, light. No one knew my last name. No one asked about Thanksgiving. No one cared if I was someone's daughter or sister or disappointment. I was just Lila. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. And in one of those mornings, as sunlight poured across the stone floors of the art room, I felt it. A stillness I hadn't known I was chasing. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bruised. I wasn't seeking revenge in every shadow. I had become someone beyond what they had done, not in spite of them, but because of what I survived. It took years of erasure, of forced silence, of rejection dressed as tough love to strip me down to something real. And that truth, once bitter, had started to taste like freedom. I never responded to my mother's letter. I never went back to another family event. But I did send one thing, months later, on Mother's Day. No words, no note, just a framed photo of one of my best-selling dinnerware pieces in the window of a Paris shop. It was titled, "The Unwanted One." The caption read, "Crafted by the daughter they called invisible." That was the last time I ever heard from them. Years later, my story would be included in a documentary about women who rose from family betrayal to global recognition. Not because I chased fame, but because the truth has a way of carving its place into the world, especially when it's been silenced for too long. Now, every Thanksgiving, I don't host a dinner. I don't cook revenge. I light a candle. I sit alone or with people who love without conditions. And I serve one thing, peace, because that's the meal they could never afford to give me. But I made it myself, and I made enough for a lifetime.